Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment from our webinar series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Do you understand the risks and opportunities your business faces? A materiality assessment has helped Australian steel manufacturer InfraBuild identify and prioritise the environmental, social and economic topics it needs to focus on to become more sustainable. Join David Bell, InfraBuild's Manager Sustainability and Insight, to learn how the steelmaker's materiality assessment has informed its sustainability strategy. David will also explain how the assessment has helped engage stakeholders and how InfraBuild is applying what it learned to all parts of the business. Our thinkstep-anz CEO, Barbara Nebel, joins David on this webinar. Barbara will explain how to run a materiality assessment, how to choose stakeholders to interview, and how the materiality process future-proofs your business. Here's a sneak preview.
And that really is where materiality assessment comes in. It's talking to a wide range of stakeholders, stakeholder groups. They would be your local communities, your investors, your peers. In New Zealand, it would be your iwi. In Australia, it would be your Indigenous communities, your clients. All your external stakeholders will have a view. Equally important are your internal stakeholders, all your staff, and that's not just the senior management, but also the apprentice who just started a month ago. Why did they start? What do they think is important?
If you haven't heard of us at InfraBuild, you might remember us and our previous guys as One Steel, although we've been InfraBuild for around 5 years now. Fundamentally, our business is around taking about 1.4 million tonnes of steel scrap, and we turn that back into high quality steel. And really that came down to 6 main reasons why we decided to do a materiality assessment. First off, as Barbara said, it goes really deep, but it also goes really wide. And for us, it gets right across our entire supplier, customer and our stakeholder landscape. And from that, you wind up with a myriad of information, and one of which is, as Barbara showed on her slide before, the materiality matrix. So for us, we wound up with 26 material issues, the various dots that you can see on the screen there. And then through the 2 processes, one through the external e-survey and one through the internal senior leaders workshop, you rank those against the X and Y axis. But all 26 have been taken on board by our Executive Sustainability Committee, our HR teams, recruitment and attraction teams, but also integrated right across the business with a view to reviewing and updating, if need be, the frameworks and the policies that already exist.
With that, let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. So today is all about materiality. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, David Bell, we've been working together for, I don't know how many years, David?
It would be well over a decade now, Barbara. Over a decade.
Yeah. And it's been fantastic to work with you and the whole team on a whole various range of projects. But today is all about materiality. And I'm very much looking forward to hear your take on it. What are your drivers? How have you gone about it? So why would you do it? It's because we need to know, is it carbon? Is it the environment? Is it people? How do we make a choice? What do we pick? And everyone will have a different opinion on what is most important. So you could follow a simple pick and choose. One of the SDGs will fit, or maybe we choose 3 or 4 and just sort of go with your gut feel. Oh, those are things we can do. That's one way of choosing priorities. Another way of choosing the priorities would be, what's best for our business? Do we do this to create more money, to enhance our brand, to identify risks, to drive costs down? That could be one lens to choose different topics to focus on. Or we could just follow legislation. We just go with what people ask us to do. So in New Zealand, we have the Zero Carbon Act, so we have to focus on carbon. We could choose TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. we'll have to do something on modern slavery because that's already legislation in Australia. We use the ASX or the NZX listing rules. So those could all be reasons for choosing topics. Or we simply pick up the phone, not quite literally this one, and have a chat what our stakeholders want us to do. Or we do a combination of all of those. And that really is where materiality assessment comes in. It's talking to a wide range of stakeholders, stakeholder groups. They would be your local communities, your investors, your peers. In New Zealand, it would be your iwi. In Australia, it would be your Indigenous communities, your clients. All your external stakeholders will have a view. Equally important are your internal stakeholders, all your staff, and that's not just the senior management, but also the apprentice who just started a month ago. Why did they start? What do they think is important? And all those viewed together from all those stakeholder groups will give you what are the topics. Not in any particular ranking, just what are those topics. We then go about how important are they for our business and how relevant are they for our stakeholders. And that really is a workshop with the senior leadership team to go, how important are all those different topics for us? And a survey to the stakeholders. And David can talk a lot more about how they went about it. So you can kind them up with some ranking. And then gives you, in a way, two things. It gives you how relevant is our impact on the environment, on society. That comes from the stakeholder concern. You might have heard the term double materiality, because if we also think about how relevant are those topics for us as a business, then we've got the double materiality and think about what is that impact of climate change on us? What is the impact of modern slavery legislation on us? And that is sort of where the double materiality really comes in. So it's not a very difficult concept. A lot of people go, oh, double materiality. It's just really what does it mean for us as a business and what do we mean for our stakeholders as a business? And that's all I wanted to say. I will hand over here to David because it's so much better to hear from a real live example on how you went about it, what your findings were, how you're using it. So thank you very much, David, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon, everyone. As Barbara said, my name's David Bell. I'm our Manager for Sustainability and Insight. For those of you who haven't heard of InfraBuild, first off, we're an Australian-based steel recycler, steel manufacturer and a steel processor and distributor of steel products. If you haven't heard of us at InfraBuild, you might remember us and our previous guys as One Steel, although we've been InfraBuild for around 5 years now. Fundamentally, our business is around taking about 1.4 million tonnes of steel scrap, and we turn that back into high quality steel, especially reinforcing bar and reinforcing mesh products, as well as some smaller hot rolled steel sections and wire products that we supply into the Australian and New Zealand markets. We make all of that at our 2 scrap-fed electric arc furnaces, one in Sydney, where I'm based, and one in Melbourne. But we also make a wider range and supply those of tubular steel products and wire and fencing. Very broadly, and I appreciate this is a very busy slide, but this captures a lot around what we do and the ways that we help your projects meet their sustainability outcomes. There's a lot to cover here, and I'll get to the crux in a moment. There's just 3 I wanted to touch on. One is that InfraBuild has a business imperative to decarbonise our products, and we are working to what we call our CN30 objective, to be a low emission net zero steelmaker by 2030. We know what that will do in terms of our scope 1 and 2 emissions and how we will move those effectively across those 4 arrows that you see there. And we know, secondly, what that will do to the global warming potential of our EPDs, which we partner with thinkstep-anz for the generation thereof. But within that, we know what our decarbonisation journey will do in terms of reducing the GWP in those products, and we'll be updating those EPDs accordingly. And finally, before I get onto the main topic at hand, just like to share that as InfraBuild, we were recently awarded GECA certification for our reinforcing bar and reinforcing mesh products, which means we can meet the highest level of recognition in the new Green Star Buildings tool through the Responsible Products Value Framework, or for those of you doing IS-rated projects in RSO 7. In IS version 2.1. And we're really excited about this from the viewpoint that GECA talks to an independent recognition, not just of our environmental credentials, but also around our social and governance achievements as well. But really, the topic that you're all here to hear about today is our materiality assessment. So let me dive into that. Barbara led you through briefly the process of a materiality assessment, and I'll unpack that a little bit more in terms of the how. But first off, I just wanted to talk to the why we thought this was something valuable that we should engage in. And really that came down to 6 main reasons why we decided to do a materiality assessment. First off, as Barbara said, it goes really deep, but it also goes really wide. And for us, it gets right across our entire supplier, customer and land, our stakeholder landscape. The opportunity to do that with such depth and such breadth is quite rare. And by stakeholders, this means everyone, including my colleagues here at InfraBuild, our direct transactional customers, those that we sell to, the wider supply chain, design fraternity, sustainability professionals, asset owners and asset users, the communities that we work in, investors, government, regulators, basically everyone. Secondly, throughout 2020 and 2021, we wrote our formal decarbonisation and sustainability strategies. The materiality assessment gave us the opportunity for an external and independent validation of those documents. And if we'd missed anything importantly, which pleasingly we didn't, but it was a great point in time. And really that third one around a point of reference. So through that stakeholder engagement allows us to measure how we are seen today through our stakeholders' eyes. And given the repeatability of this process, and I'll talk to that a little bit later, it also allows us in the future to re-verify and recalibrate where we are as the various material issues change, which they will. The process also provides a mountain of anonymous responses and allows us to hear quite a raw and unfiltered voice of the customer, which is something that's so powerful and important in helping shape the path of our business as we listen to all our stakeholders and stakeholder groups. It allows us to understand how we can better communicate and better engage with all our customers and stakeholders, both internally and externally, and including through our ESG reporting frameworks as well. And finally, it does help us to prioritise the issues that are most important to our customers and stakeholders, and to further integrate sustainability as part of our being. In terms of how far and wide we went, our initial stakeholders interviews amounted to about 20 separate conversations, but the broad e-survey went out to all of InfraBuild, which is around 5,000 employees, as well as over 20,000 external stakeholders via email, plus those that we engaged through the likes of our LinkedIn channels. And the entire process for us as a business was about 18 weeks from go to woe. And from that, you wind up with a myriad of information, and one of which is, as Barbara showed on her slide before, the materiality matrix. So for us, we wound up with 26 material issues, the various dots that you can see on the screen there. And then through the 2 processes, one through the external e-survey and one through the internal senior leaders workshop, you rank those against the X and Y axis. So each of those 26 for us are important, but through those 2 processes, that provides a relativity against each of the 26 themes. You'll also see a bit of colour coding there. So part of InfraBuild's business model is our PMAF approach, those 4 strategic themes of people, markets, assets and financials. So we've taken the opportunity to group those into one of those 4 themes. In our sustainability report, and I'll give you a link to that in a moment, there is actually a table that provides a full description behind each of those 26 material issues, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you want to delve deeper. But one of the most powerful learnings for us out of this, if you look at the top 10, 5 of those are actually people issues, and a lot of those affect very deeply what we do and what we stand for as a business. And certainly maintaining a focus on those alone, those 5, let alone the other 3 people issues, help us to support our current employees to be the best that they can. It helps the business to be a great employer, which also then helps attract new employees as well as retaining our existing talent. So for us, some of the learnings out of this were, firstly, to look at the top 5. So those are the top 5 material issues. But again, all 26 are important. So you can't just focus on the top 5 or 10. You've got to address each of them and see how they speak both internally and externally to the stakeholders involved. So those 5 in particular, but all 26 have been taken on board by our Executive Sustainability Committee, our HR teams, recruitment and attraction teams, but also integrated right across the business with a view to reviewing and updating, if need be, the frameworks and the policies that already exist. We're certainly, one of the actions out of this is to review how each of those rank against our actions, recommendations and pathways within our sustainability strategies and our decarbonisation strategies, to check we firstly hadn't missed anything, but also to check the priorities in line with that of the stakeholders. Again, pleasingly, we didn't find anything out of alignment or timelines that need to be changed, but as we repeat this into the future, it might be that things will change. Certainly the feedback around communications was really interesting. It allowed us to understand how different parts of our customers and stakeholders, both internal and external, like to receive and absorb the information that we share. What are the timelines? How often do they like to see it? In what form do they like to see it? Is it print, digital, email, web-based, and so on? As I mentioned earlier, the process certainly lends itself to being repeated and compared. We expect we will redo a full materiality assessment in around 4 years. And we've been 1 year into it. That might seem a long time between drinks, but there's a bit of logic in waiting that long. So as I said, it's been almost a year since we formally completed this one. For us, the project itself took 18 weeks or so to do, but it's taken longer again for us to review and start to implement the recommendations, actions that flow from that. And then it takes time for those actions to have effect in the market. So roughly around 4 years is our expectation. And certainly in 4 years' time, in the ever-changing and moving sustainability landscape that we're all part of, I'd certainly expect that some of those 26 material issues will move up or down or left and right. Some may disappear and new ones may certainly appear. So that's really all part of the reason for doing this on a regular cadence. But certainly by having this process in place, by doing our first materiality assessment, it's provided us with some crucial feedback and information to help set us up for success with our employees and our stakeholders. But it's been a very worthy exercise. Just finishing up here before we take a couple of questions, hopefully, as I mentioned, there is more information on the materiality assessment that we did in our latest sustainability report, available via the website or by the QR code there you see on the screen. It's pretty easy to find. Once you've taken the time to download that, I'd encourage you to have a read through the entire sustainability report. There's certainly a wealth of information there on how we are going to significantly decarbonise our steelmaking between now and 2030, as well as our approach, actions, and some of the outcomes already to date on our broader sustainability journey. For those of you who've listened in and the 2/3 of you that haven't yet undertaken a materiality assessment and think this is a worthwhile exercise for your own business, I would give a shout out to thinkstep-anz, who are obviously our consultants on this project, but especially like to acknowledge both Andrea Davies and Nicole Sullivan, who led the project for us from start to finish. And finally, please get in contact with me if you'd like to talk any more about what we did, what we found from our materiality assessment, or indeed any of the other things I showed you a bit earlier on that very busy slide. So thank you for listening.
I'll just say a very quick Thank you, David, now for sharing your story and really sharing your experience. My colleagues Nicole and Andrea, who actually were running the process, said it was the one project where it was really easy to engage also with all the stakeholders. And that clearly has to do with you already having a fantastic relationship with your stakeholders. So in that sense, it was a wonderful project for us to work on, and a really easygoing one. So thank you also for that. And
Wonderful.
everyone
Good to
else,
hear.
I'd actually encourage you reading that report. It's a really good report. We do have a first question. That is, how did you go about getting the stakeholders engaged in the materiality assessment process?
Certainly. So you could tackle that from a couple of levels. The first is around getting senior leadership buy-in. So getting them involved and understanding the reasons for doing a materiality assessment. Part of the reasons I didn't talk to this was one of the other reasons was to support the GRI reporting in our sustainability report. So that lends credence to it. But it also, as I said, the other 6 reasons I spoke about were very important. Getting stakeholders involved, getting the right people involved for those initial interviews that for us generated the 26 materiality issues is quite important. As Barbara mentioned, we went very wide, even internally, so that people that were interviewed internally were from senior leadership right down to people who work on the factory floor. Not to say that any are rated any higher or lower, but you get the sense of we didn't just pick one particular group. We went right across our entire business, and we went from the very top down to the people who work the machines in a production or operator capacity.
There's another question from Dan. Were there any examples of shifts in thinking motivated by the materiality assessment, and were there any surprises that prompted fresh thinking?
Pleasingly, there were no surprises. There was certainly some thoughts in terms of where each of those 26 wound up on in the materiality assessment. Part of my existence is around decarbonisation, so I hoped that it might have ranked a little bit higher up on the chart, but it's really that's the voice of the stakeholder, that it sits relative to sustainable financial performance, which is the highest one in ours. But it offered some insights as well as, so culture and values was one that sat very highly. So in some ways it reinforced the things that we already had in action, and part of the whole process is we have taken the results of the materiality assessment back around full circle to our senior leadership. So we took them through the why we do it. We took them through the senior leader workshop to generate the y-axis results in the chart. But then after everything is said and done, after the ink is dried on the report, we took them back through the findings to understand, for them to understand what the stakeholders said of where they see us.
Mm. You almost answered Virginia's question, which is next. How did you undertake the process of getting leadership buy-in? Was there difficulties you overcame with that?
We were blessed that our CEO at the time had an appreciation of what a materiality assessment had done. The previous business that he was CEO at had undertaken one, so there was already a natural buy-in on that. I think the difficulties, if anything, are the mass of people. So for us, we engaged by email well over 20,000 people. So having your processes set up for that, having the ability to track, knowing that you're going out to the right people is important. But as I say, and thanks for reflecting, Barbara, what Andrea and Nicole shared. But it's a relatively easy process to go through, but getting the leadership buy-in is crucial, as with all things, but they are certainly seeing, as we've come full circle and we've got the results, and we're now overlaying those with our business unit plans to make sure that everything's incorporated, they're seeing the value out of that as well.
And what I really would recommend is to have a read of the report, because the content is in there also with description. So that probably would be my recommendation, to have a look at the report. It includes the matrix, it includes a description of what stakeholders were involved. So that might give you better context than the slides on their own. But I guess feel free to get in touch with David directly as well.
Totally welcome. Happy for people to get in touch. If any of you didn't get my details, you can find me on LinkedIn in the normal fashion.
Tanzin wants to know, how long did the process take?
For us, it was 18 weeks, go to woe. We had planned 16. We had one little pause partway along, which was an external factor that we just had to pause the process for 2 weeks, not related to ThinkStep, not related to us. It was an external factor that meant we had to pause, but ultimately it was 18 weeks from go to woe.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say again a big thank you, not only for sharing your story here, but to being a really good partner to work with as well. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to everyone who's listened in. I hope you found this of great value, and I hope you consider taking upon a materiality assessment for any or all of the reasons that we've been through.
Well, someone already commented here, thank you. It was great information for someone starting off. So we already get good feedback. Thank you. Thanks for everyone for putting your questions in to keep it really interactive. Another compliment here from Tanzan. Thanks, David. We're fortunate enough at EW Edwards to visit the InfraBuild site yesterday. Just wanted to say amazing work. So
you're very welcome,
nice
Tanzan. I heard from my colleague David Zorsey that it was a great visit there to our steel mill at Rooty Hill out in Western Sydney.
With that, thanks again, David. If you're interested in hearing more stories from industry, our next one will be on how to use your sustainability data to tell your story. That'll be with Essity and my colleague Jeff Vickers. We might put a link in the chat to register, but you'll also find it in the usual places. And with that, again, a very big thank you to everyone, and have a wonderful and productive afternoon.
Thank you all.